Shalom, hello, welcome, Bruchim Habaim. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jesse Feld. I am the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond's Director of Development and Engagement, and I'm glad that you are all here with us. Before we get started here officially, I want to thank everybody and remind you all to make sure to mute your microphones until the question and answer portion of it, unless you are really itching to ask Itai, our leader, a question. Other than that, sit back, relax, and enjoy. And it's now my pleasure to introduce one of our mission co-chairs, Jay Schwartz.
Thanks, Jesse. Welcome to all of you to the first of a number of Israel-related virtual tours and classes to explore. Find out about each by visiting jewishrichmond.org or by clicking the link Jesse has put into the chat. While the other tours are not limited in numbers, the cooking class and wine tasting are. So if interested, you should sign up as soon as possible.
I like it. Look it.
A special thanks to the Richmond Jewish Community Foundation for sponsoring this event. It is my pleasure to introduce our tour guide for today, Itai Gat. Having seen a teaser for today's journey, you all are in for a treat. I want to thank Itai for his guidance today, as well as each of you for your participation. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask any questions you may have for Itai. You can find the chat box towards the bottom of your Zoom screen. Dr. Itai Gat graduated from the esteemed Israeli military Tel Aviv-Yaffo program and later served in the IDF Research and Development Centers. He received his PhD from the Institute of Computer Science at Hebrew University, focusing on brain sciences. Following his army service, Itai worked in Israel high tech, first in the field of speech processing, and then as a researcher of Compugen, where he led a research group in the area of computational medicine. In 2003, Itai joined Mobileye, where he eventually became senior vice president. Throughout the following 15 years, Itai was privileged to work towards making the advanced driving assistance systems an everyday reality. Mobileye achieved what only a few believed possible, becoming the innovative leader in the field. Today, Mobileye, now an Intel company, is leading the next revolution in autonomous driving. Since his early years, Itai nursed another passion, the love for the land of Israel, its scenery, archaeology, wildlife, and unique history. In 2018, with a feeling of accomplishment regarding his previous roles, Itai felt he could now embark on a new career as a full-time tour guide. In this capacity, he can now fulfill his passion and direct his energy towards conveying this love of the land to Israelis and tourists alike. Itai is married with 3 children and lives in Jerusalem. He is a dedicated triathlete and volunteers with the Zahal IDF Disabled Veterans Organization, Beit Halachem, helping rebuild wounded veterans' lives through sport. Now, on with the show.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm starting to share now my screen. And I hope in a second you'll see that I picked up the right place to start with. And I'm going to take you now to your first tour guide in Israel. So first, let's go a bit up and make our way toward Israel. I'd be glad, as I said before, for any question, comment, both during the talk and also after, and feel free to ask me. So we made a quick way towards Israel, and now we can start descending and see on Israel the 3 planned tours. One, which would be the tour guide that we're going to have today in Old Jaffa. In blue line, you see the Israel National Trail that we're going to look into in a short while. And last but certainly not least, we're also going to pay a visit to Jerusalem. But let's first start with Jaffa, which is the main gate to the land of Israel and specifically towards Jerusalem. As you can see, when we are going down, Jaffa is a peninsula going into the Mediterranean, and we are going to focus on the old part of Jaffa, the place that I'm currently pointing at. And as you'll be able to see shortly, it's a bit of a hill going into the sea. I hope that everybody is able to see the old part of Jaffa, the area that I'm pointing at. And now, to see it a bit from the, not just from the air, we're going to switch into this view over here, where we're going to see the lovely Mediterranean Sea and the port of Jaffa. And our tour today is going to be talking about the various gates that Jaffa serves as. So we briefly mentioned the fact that Jaffa is the entrance to the land of Israel, but throughout Jaffa we will find several other gates there are waiting for us. And Jaffa, as was already hinted in the introductory presentation by Jesse, is the port that was used by King Solomon to import wood for the first temple built almost 3,000 years ago. It is here that the prophet Jonah went to sea, and this is also where the story of Andromeda took place. That's the story that I'm going to start with, even before we are going to get into the land. And the story evolved about the rock that we see here. And if we want to see it in a bit more detail, this is how the rocks that are seen from the shore of Jaffa look like. And if we get into a little bit details, this is what we see today. But that's not how it looked when slightly more than 3,000 years ago, when the following story took place. This is a story that is told as part of the Greek mythology, and it's about Andromeda, who was a beautiful princess living here in Jaffa, and her mother, Cassiopeia, insulted the god of the sea, Poseidon. Her mother, Cassiopeia, told everybody that Andromeda was the most beautiful person in the world, and Poseidon, thinking that his daughters were the most beautiful ones, starting a rage against Jaffa, where waves were coming towards the land. And the only way to satisfy him was to sacrifice Andromeda. And she was chained to this rock that you see now in front of you. And a huge beast, a monster from the sea, was coming to take her. Now, at that exact moment came one of the legendary heroes, Perseus, who was the son of Zeus, the head of gods in the Greek mythology. And he was able to save her from the sea monster and release her from the chains, and of course, marry her afterwards. And what we got still these days is that this rock standing in front of us on the Mediterranean in front of Jaffa is named after Andromeda. And one other interesting fact is that for many years, there were chains that were still connected to this rock here. Unfortunately, something like 1,500 years ago, they were lost. And today, you would not be able to see the chains, but just the waves hitting that stone when you are getting close to Jaffa. So having said that, we can now start our tour here and get off the ship. But unfortunately, Jaffa Gate, or the port here, was built at a time where the ships was rather small. Therefore, this is a shallow water port. and it was not possible to get with your ship till the shore. And I would like to show you now one such example of people getting far away from the land. And you see a picture here that was a video that was taken. You see that already? Oh.
It's not, it's just dark right now.
Okay, so I'll skip that video. It was to show that ships were not able to get into the harbor, but I think that I got a better example showing that in a lovely picture that was taken at the mid. I think that now you're able to see the same issue, that ships are not able to get close to the shore because it's a shallow port. So if you would have come now to Israel by a ship, you need to get down from your ship somewhere around here, something like half a mile from the shore. This is a picture taken at the mid-20th century. But before that, and then take a boat that would take you to the shore. But that sounds a bit romantic and quite nice. I think that the next picture would show you that it was not always as calm here. This is a picture that was drawn by a German painter living in Israel at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and he showed that the sea could be sometimes with high waves, and getting to shore was not as easy as one can think. And I'd like to add to that a testimony that was made by a young person traveling to Israel, just as you're doing now, and he was doing that at 1907. And he wrote the following statement. Just a sec. Jaffa made a great impression on me. I do not know what the port of Jaffa was like in the days of the prophet Jonah, but in the days of the Ottoman rule, it was in ruins and primitive and looked like a relic from ancient times. The ship dropped anchor about half a mile from shore, with many cliffs separating it from the mainland. As soon as the ship arrived, sailors and porters appeared, and without waiting for the bridge to open, they climbed the ropes of the ship, jumped on board without asking for permission, caught the passengers' belongings, and threw them into the boats swaying on the waves. With their wild shouts and terrifying eyes, they looked like pirates. The Jewish immigrants stood stunned and astonished and did not know what to do. After the sailor threw their belongings into the boat, they threw the passengers into the boat as well. The passenger then had to sit in the boat on their luggage. In this way, the Arab sailors transferred people, and they owned into the shore. And now came a quote from Prophet Jeremiah, that thy children shall come again to their own border. And the person who was writing this description remembered that for many years, and 50-something years after that, he became the second president of the state of Israel. And I'm talking about Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, who was describing the way that he arrived to Israel at 1907 and how complex it was to get through the first gate that opened through the land that he was hoping to get. And now I'd like to move to another view of the same port. And this is a view that would accompany us through the tour, because the previous tool that I was using were based on Google Earth and in a short while I'll show you some pictures. This is a very interesting and innovative tool that was made by one of Israel's high-tech companies that involves a lot of image processing and presentation tools. And we found it quite useful if we want to give you the feeling that we are now just hovering above Old Jaffa and going to walk you through its path. And as I said, we just were able to get through the port and get safely to the mainland. But what I wanted to equip you with is for the next time that you're going to travel to Israel and get there by boat, I want to give you something useful for you to use in case you are coming all by yourself and want to cross this treacherous water. Now, the trick in order to get into this port is to look for two things. One is this tower that I'm now pointing at. This is the tower of a mosque, the sea mosque that is the closest to the sea. And in a short while, you'll be able to see also another, sorry?
Yeah.
Oh. In a short while, you'll be able to see another mosque over here and the tower of it. Now, if you look from the sea for both of these towers and align them one to the other, and I'm now changing the view so you'll see exactly how it looks like and how it is done. So I was now able to align these two towers. Here, the big one, and this further away, the sea mosque. Now you'll see that if you keep these two towers aligned, you will be able to get through this very narrow strait here between the rocks and sail safely into the harbor. So if you're coming from sea, just have both of these towers aligned one to the other, sail your ship or boat directly in that line, and you will get safely into the harbor. So now that we were able to get to the shore and hear the stories about how it was to get to the land at the beginning of the 20th century, I'd like to take you up the hill of Old Jaffa. And in a short while, you'll see that behind the gate that was entering the land, you will see two other gates that are seen here. One that I point here to the right and one to the left. Let's start with this one first. So I'm going to show it. Oh, is it? Oh, sorry. So that's the first gate that you've seen. Now I'm using a tool that enables me to put you within the scenery and sort of take you in and out and show you also the surrounding of the area that we're in. So what you see in front of you is a gate, and you see a lot of Egyptian hieroglyphs written on it. This is a reconstruction of a gate that was found here in archaeological excavation. And if you were able to read these hieroglyphs, you would be able to see that the king, the Egyptian king that is described here, is the same Egyptian king that we were just talking about a week and a half ago. This is Ramses II, which is supposedly the Egyptian king at the time of Exodus, the time that the people of Israel went out of Egypt. That's just what we talked about in the Seder a week and a half ago. And the fact that we found his name here in Jaffa means that on the 13th century BC, at the time that the people of Israel were leaving Egypt, the Egyptians were ruling Israel. And if we would like to see how this place used to look like at the time that they were in command of Israel, I will show you the following picture. This is the gate that we just saw. And if you look carefully, you see on both sides the same hieroglyph that we saw that mentioned the name of the king, Ramses II. And in the far behind the gate, you're still able to see the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the port that we just came through. Now, the fact that there was this huge stronghold means that the Egyptians saw a lot of importance in keeping Jaffa as the main port here in Israel. And there's another story that talks about how they were able to capture this city. And the story goes on like that. At the time before the Egyptian came here, the land of Canaan, as we know it at the time, were ruled by local rulers. And when the Egyptian army came here, they were not able to conquer the walls that were around Jaffa at the time. So at some point, the general of the army, who had this hard to pronounce name, Sochoti, had to capture Jaffa by a trick. So he asked the king to provide him with his scepter, with his staff, and asked for 200 baskets made of rope, filled them with jewelry, and came to the Canaanite ruler of Jaffa and told him, I've departed from my king, and now I'm offering you his scepter, his staff. I'm offering you these 200 baskets of jewelry, and I'm going to be your servant from this day on. The ruler of Jaffa was thrilled from that statement, and therefore he accepted the scepter, and his people carried the 200 baskets into the old city of Jaffa. I think some of you already imagine what was really inside these baskets, and these were 200 warriors that came out of the baskets and conquered Jaffa. And furthermore, I believe that some of you think that that story sounds a bit familiar because it somehow resembles the story of how Troy was captured with the Trojan horse. But pay attention, Troy was captured somewhere around the 12th century BC. The story of Jaffa, well documented, found in Egypt, was written 200 years before. So now whenever you're thinking about the Trojan horse, know that Jaffa is the original place where that story took place, and the conqueror of Israel by the Egyptian is the true story about the Trojan horse. I would like now to move on to the next gate that we have in Jaffa, and this is the gate that we are able to see at the yard above. So giving you a bit of orientation, this is where we were standing before. That's where we saw the gate of Ramses. And now we are on top of the hill, top of Old Jaffa, and look at the magnificent view that we have all around us. Here is the Mediterranean Sea with the blue water spreading towards the west. Here is a church named after St. Peter that's standing in the middle of Jaffa. The sea continued to go around the Old Jaffa Peninsula, and to the north of it, we are able to see the new city of Tel Aviv that was established here at the beginning of the 20th century. And if we continue to look to the side, we will see this magnificent statue. This is the Gate of Faith, a sculpture that was put here at the mid-70s, made by an Israeli sculptor called Daniel Kafri. And this is actually telling us the next story in Jaffa's history. I mean, we talked before about the time that Jaffa was part of the Egyptian kingdom. But as we said, the Egyptian king who was ruling here was the Egyptian king that the people of Israel left Egypt at his time. So this sculpture over here tells us about God's promise to the people of Israel and the fulfillment in arriving to Israel and capturing this land. Now, what do we see here? We see two pillars here that are telling us about the promise of God to the people of Israel. Let me show that to you in detail. Here we see Abraham. This is his head. He's looking upwards. To be very precise, that's his hair, that's his beard, and here you see his eyes looking upward. He's sitting about the ram that is going to be sacrificed in a short while. After God is telling him to stop the sacrifice of Isaac, who is portrayed here. I hope that you're able to see Isaac is lying on top of Abraham. Abraham is holding him here with his hand. That's the leg of Isaac, and that's his face. And see that Isaac, in his turn, is holding the upper part of this sculpture. On the right-hand side, we see the third part of the forefathers of the Jewish people, and this is Jacob. Jacob is lying here, that's his face, that's his feet. He is dreaming, and in his dream, he's seeing a ladder with angels, and these are two of these angels. So I'm showing you one of the angels is the one that we see here with his feet. And look here on that side, and you see the wings of that angel standing just on top of Jacob. And here we see another angel. Again, you can see the wings, you can see his feet, and he's standing sort of on top of the first angel. So this part, these two pillars, are the promises of God to the people of Israel that they are going to inherit the land that now they are walking to. And the upper part of this sculpture is how this promise was fulfilled. This is how the people of Israel captured Jericho when they entered the land of Israel in order to continue and capture the whole land. Pay attention, and I'll show you just for a brief review this sculpture also from a slightly different angle. Again, you see here the ram, you see here Abraham. I think that in this angle he's slightly more visible and it's easier to see. Again, you see Isaac here, Jacob here, and the conquest of Jericho here above us. So this statue standing here symbolizes the fact that the land of Israel is now belonging to the Jewish people after the promise from God. So this was the second gate that we were able to see in Jaffa. And now I'm going to go and continue describing the other elements that we see in Jaffa that show us the history of that place. But before doing that, I want to show something that seems to be a bit out of order, in the sense that we are talking about the fact that we are now in the mid-Old Jaffa. But see, this is again the place that we were just standing on before. That is the gate of faith, and that is the gate of Ramses II, the Egyptian gate. But have a look, see that the central part of Jaffa is sort of empty. There's just a park here. And that seems a bit unlikely for a city to be so open and having so much of a green park inside. And indeed, that was not the case for most of the history of Jaffa. The fact that there are open parks here had to do with the Arab rebellion of the mid-1930s. At that time, Jaffa was mostly Arab, and they started a rebellion against the British who were ruling Israel. And as part of that rebellion, they were shooting at Tel Aviv, which is just north of here in this direction. So at one point, the British decided that they had to find ways to control this rebellion. And one of these ways was to sort of evacuate this area over here. They called that operation Operation Anchor. And the reason was that the shape of the area that they freed of building was the shape of an anchor. This is the lower part of the anchor, and this here is the middle part of the anchor. And ever since the 30s, this area was clear of buildings, and therefore, when the city of Jaffa was connected to Tel Aviv, at some point it was decided that it would be best to have green parks here, and thereafter in the mid-70s to put here this gate that show us the promise of God to the people of Israel. And now I'm going to show you what remained of Old Jaffa, and this is the area that I'm currently pointing at. It was still possible to preserve some of the old buildings of Jaffa. In old buildings, I'm talking about 19th century buildings. And we're going to go down into one of the alleys in Old Jaffa that was still preserved that the way it was when it was built at the 19th century. And I'm taking you now to this alley. And this is the art quarter of Jaffa. When the Tel Aviv-Yaffo municipality decided to renovate the place, they called artists to come and sit at those streets. And the outcome of that is that the streets are packed with galleries. For example, the one that you see here, which is an art or a picture gallery with a changing exhibition. Look at the lovely building that they choose to have. You can see, by the way, that the buildings are made of the local stone. The local stone of Jaffa is what we call in Hebrew purkar. And you see that in more details here. It's actually a petrified dune. A very interesting stone and carved just here, and all the buildings in Jaffa are made from that stone. And when I'm changing the view, you see that there's not just art galleries, that there's also arts and crafts. And here you see the sign of one carpenter who decided to make this house his working place. And we can see also the narrow alleys that stretches here all the way, and even some of the paintings that are seen here marked on the wall. So please keep that in mind for the next time that you are traveling to Jaffa, and take your time to visit some of these galleries and enjoy the exhibition and the view of walking in those streets. And now I want to take you to the continuation of that street to this place over here. What you see here is what we call the flying orange. Jaffa was known for its orchards and oranges. It all has to do with the fact that almost exactly 180 years ago, at 1841, in one of the orchards, owned by a Christian Arab called Antoine Ayoub. They were able to find a specific orange that have a thicker peel. And that may not sound as impressive as it may, but it is, because the fact that the peel was thicker made it much more easier to export these oranges. And Jaffa became an empire in the export of oranges, and actually the Jaffa name became the brand of oranges. And all the area around Old Jaffa became filled with orchards and this new type of orange. It has also a name, it's called shamuti. This is still the orange that we are enjoying these days. And it all has to do with the fact that it had longer shelf life because of the thicker peel and the fact that it still preserved the sweet taste of the orange. Now, what you see in front of you now is sort of an homage to the fact that Jaffa was once an empire of oranges, and Israeli sculptor called Ran Morin was able to make this kind of miracle of growing an orange inside a floating jar. And as you can see, that jar is connected by wires to the buildings around them. And if you look carefully, you will be able to see that even that orange is able to make fruit. This orange thing, this color orange here, is one of the fruits that is growing in this flying orange. So on one hand, this is sort of an homage to the time. Sorry, a question? Okay. It's sort of an homage to the time that Jaffa was surrounded by orchard of oranges. And on the other hand, I think that he's trying to tell us that to a large extent, we moved away from the land, and now we are a bit floating in the air. And to show a little bit in more details how Jaffa looked like at those times, I'm going to make my way again up into the air, and I'm going to show you now the place where the first tree that had this new variant of orange grew. And in order to do that, I need to take you down here to this area. Oh, this area here. Second, you will see that. Here, I'm now descending towards the building. This is the original building that was put here by Antoine Ayoub, the person that I mentioned before, who found the new variant of the orange. And here you see the building that he put in order to control the orchard that now you can understand was all around him. It is interesting to mention that this building was preserved because of its historical significance. And what you're able to see also is that the highway that was built here had to cross very near this historical building. And therefore, as you see here, they put it here into a tunnel. That's what you see here, a tunnel that is going underneath the building and still enable us today to see the place where the orange industry of Jaffa started. And the reason that I took you here now is also to give you the understanding that all the way from this building to the old part of Jaffa, everywhere here was full of orchards growing this new type of orange trees, the shamuti. As you see these days, it is mostly an urban area, and the flying orchard, that the sculpture that we've seen, is sort of the symbol of that, we do not have yet orchard around Jaffa, but we still like to remember that this is one of the claims to fame of Jaffa, being the gate through which oranges were sent worldwide. The next point that I want to show you in the history and the story of Jaffa is the gate, a real gate that stood here in the wall of Jaffa, that was at the point here. And I'm going to show that to you now in a map that was drawn at the mid 1840s. This was the time that, as you are able to see, Jaffa was a highly dense city living within the walls that you see here. And the numbers here are showing how the protection of the city took place. So in order to understand them slightly better, I'm going to show you a cut through the protection layers around the city, and then I'm going to concentrate about the only gate that was in the walls of Jaffa that connected it to the world, and this is what we see here. So first, how were people defending the city at the time? Well, we used to think that there was a wall and that was mostly it. But if we look carefully, what we were able to see that the lines of defense around the city were much more complicated. There was first a moat. That is what you see here. I mean, what we see is a section through the defense line. So there was a moat around the city. And going back to the previous city, this is mentioned here by number 1, the ditch around the city. And after the moat, there was a lower wall and another line of defense. And again, going back, this is what is portrayed here as number 2, all around the city. Continue also here. And only then came the wall of the city that was the third line of defense. And I'm going through all that story because today we are not able to see all of that, but what is visible to us is this area here. So first you see this kind of building here that I'm going to talk about in a short while and explain what do you see. But this is where this complex defense line stood at Jaffa. This is what I was pointing towards from the air before. And I'm going to explain now the 3 layers that I've showed at the cut. So here, at the area that I'm pointing, was the moat or the ditch. And in order to enable people to get through this gate, there was a bridge here. This here was the main square before the gate. You can see that it's paved now with a different type of stone on the road. And here, exactly where I'm pointing at, stood the high wall that protected everything that was here within the wall. For example, the taxi here was within the walls of that city. And it means that you were not able to get into the city, of course, through that. So the way that you entered the city was through this archway that you see here. It was an L-shaped gate that you have to actually enter through here and then take a right turn, and only then you are able to get through the gate of that city. So you see that Jaffa was well protected at the time that this complex was built at the beginning of the 19th century, and therefore it was really hard to penetrate that. And the story that I'm going to tell you now about what is this thing that was built here had to do exactly with the fact that it was really challenging to get into Jaffa when people were closing the gate that we are now standing at. And the story goes on like that. At the beginning of the 19th century, the ruler of Jaffa was known by the name Abu Nabut, or complete name Muhammad Abu Nabut. Now in Arabic, Abu stands for the father of. So you may imagine that the name of his son was Nabut, but that's not entirely correct because the name of his son was Mahmud. And actually, the mosque that you see here, and if you remember, that was the tower that we used before to orient the ships that were coming into the port with, that mosque here is called after the son of the ruler of Jaffa, whose name was Mahmud. So what is Nabut? Nabut is the Arabic name of a club. And it goes to say that this ruler was rather brutal in the sense that he used to walk all around Jaffa with his club, and anything that was not according to his taste, he used the club to tell people that things are not going according to the right way, and therefore he gathered the nickname Abu Nabut at some point. So I think that now that you can imagine the kind of person who was ruling Jaffa at the time, you can better appreciate the fact that at one day, he went to stroll at the outskirts of Jaffa, meaning somewhere at this area that was outside the walls. And at some point, he laid his head to have a bit of a rest, and robbers got hold of him and stole his clothes and all his belongings. Now, at the time that he got back to this gate here at the entrance of Jaffa, it was already dark, and the guards who were controlling this gate did not allow him to enter because they told him, well, the ruler of the place, Abu Nabut, told us not to let anyone get into the city. He tried to claim that he was the ruler of the city, that he was Abu Nabut, but that didn't make much impression on the guards who didn't know him personally, but they were really afraid of the name. So he had to spend the whole night thirsty outside the walls of Jaffa. So when morning came and new guards went in and allowed him to enter the city, he took two actions. One, he used his club against the guardians of the gate, as he used to do in all his days. But the other thing, more important, he decided from his experience that it would be a good idea to build a drinking fountain just at the gate. So the idea is that the drinking fountain, which is what you see here in front of you, is available also for people coming from the outside who are not able to use the entrance here and enter the city because it is blocked. So he built that complete with marble that he acquired from other places in Israel and called it after the Ottoman Sultan who was ruling at the time. And he also added here the sign of the Ottoman rulers, which is what you see here on the top of this drinking fountain. By the way, the name of a drinking fountain in Arabic is Sabil. So the name of the place that you are currently looking at is Sabil Abu Nabut. And furthermore, the gate that we are now standing at, that is no longer a gate because anybody can just drive his way through into Jaffa these days, is named after the road that started in this area. And the road, as you may remember, from Jaffa led to Jerusalem. Therefore, you are now standing at Jerusalem Gate. And just to complete the story here, at the second half of the 19th century, Jaffa started to expand beyond the wall. So the wall that stood here was removed, and all this area of the moat that was here was filled with gravel, and the new land was built here. And today you will not be able to find any reminiscence of the walls that once were circling Jaffa from all its direction. And we should just remember, and that's why the municipality put here the different type of bricks to show us that once this was the entrance to Jaffa, and actually this was the only entrance, because Old Jaffa at the time had just one gate that were letting people get into that city. So we will now continue our path and going outside of the walls at that time. And what you see here is one of today's well-known symbols of Jaffa. This is the clock tower. The clock tower was built here just at the beginning of the 20th century. It was marking 25 years of ruling of the Ottoman Sultan at the time. His name was Abdul Hamid II, and he ordered to build clock towers all around the Ottoman Empire, and this is one of these towers that is still standing till that day, and it is actually one of the well-known spots around Jaffa. And it's interesting to mention that this is, we tend to think of Jaffa as Old Jaffa, but this is standing outside the walls and is a symbol of modern Jaffa. The people of Jaffa who went outside the wall were able to acquire modern technology and get the time from the ruler. Just behind these buildings, again, as was seen in the initial presentation that Jesse has shown, there was a market. This market used to stand here at the time that the moat was here, and this was the gate that led to the city. And people were coming and putting their vegetables and fruits just here outside the walls and dealing that with the market. Today, this is the flea market of Jaffa, and I want to give you a bit of a glimpse of how this market looks like today. And this is the main street of the market. See that even in Corona days where people are wearing masks, there are many people who are strolling to the market, and you can see menorah here. You can see above us all sort of colorful clothing and all sorts of artifacts like this horn here, or this sign of a hand that is called in Hebrew Hamsa. And swords, basically everything that you're looking for in the flea market, you will find here. Again, highly recommended that if you have some time walking through the street of Jaffa, pay a short visit to this market here. You would not be disappointed. It's a colorful and lovely market. And there's also a lot of food that you can find in this market. And food is actually the last point and the last element that I want to mention. And this is the area here. Just to give you a bit of orientation, this is the clock tower we just saw, meaning that we are still just on the street that is circling Old Jaffa, where the moat was. That's the place that I'm pointing, where behind that street were the second line of defense, and behind that were the walls of Jaffa. And what you see in front of you is one of the well-known establishments in Jaffa, which is Bulafia Bakery. Bulafia is an Arabic family that's been living here for generations. And as you can see, this place was established at 1879. This is roughly the time that Jaffa started to expand beyond the walls of the old city because it was too crowded. And as said, one of the first establishments being built was this place here that served as a bakery for all the people around. This became quite famous one. And the fact that you see now this place empty is quite unique, because usually you will see something like this. There's a long queue, and that queue is to be seen sort of 24 hours all around the clock. So people are coming here at the middle of the night to buy pita bread and to buy all sort of other baking and treats. And I'd like to show you also the sweet part of that bakery that can be seen at this part here. So these are baklawa and knafe and other sweets that the Arab bakeries are well known. And if you look carefully, you see here the oven that is used for baking both the sweets and all the other pastries that you see being sold here. And I'd like to finalize our walk here by showing you yet another picture of this bakery, and with the last owner. This person is called Chamisa Bulafia. He's the fourth generation of bakers. You see him standing here by the oven. And he was quite famous in Jaffa for taking care of the complex inter-faith relation between Jews and Muslims and even Christians. And one of the symbols of the time that Chamisa Bulafia took ownership of the bakery is the fact that, as I was saying before, this place is open 24 hours a day. But that's not entirely true, because there are 2 times at the year that this place is not working. One of them is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where, and the other is, as you may imagine, the holiday that we had just a week and a half ago in Passover, that as a sign of tolerance and not trying to sort of pick an eye for the Jews living in Jaffa, Chamisa Bulafia decided that on these 2 occasions, the bakery is going to be closed, and to show that he is part of the delicate life that is happening in Israel. Unfortunate, I must tell you that in the COVID, in the coronavirus disease, he passed away just a few months ago, and now his brothers and his kids are running the bakery with the same spirit. So, with having said that and describing the spirit of modern Jaffa, and of course with a big recommendation of coming to this bakery and tasting the wonderful pastry that they're still making today, I want to give a bit of summary to what we have seen today. So we have seen the old port of Jaffa that was the gate to Israel for many years. And we discussed how complex was it to get from the ships that were able to get just to a half a mile from the shore and pass through the treacherous waves and the cliffs that were here and getting safely on these small boats upon to shore. We described what people saw when they came first to Israel. We looked at two gates that are here within Old Jaffa, the gate that symbolized the Egyptian control of the land before the people of Israel went out of Egypt, and the gate of faith that is standing here that symbolized the reign of Israelis over this land. From here, we went to the old part of Jaffa from the 19th century, where the alleys today still show us how this place used to look like when it was a crowded city growing, and a city whose main product was oranges. From here, we went to Jerusalem Gate here and discussed how the city protected itself with the defense layers, and also the story of Abu Nabut and the drinking fountain that he established here after being caught outside the city for one night. That's exactly the point where we can see the expansion of Jaffa and the clock tower here. That is the symbol of Old Jaffa. And we finish with the Bulafia Bakery that is over here, and the Flea Market over here on this street that is preserving some of the taste and smell and feeling of Old Jaffa and its cuisine. So with that, I thank you for joining me in visiting Old Jaffa, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them now.
Itai, thank you very much. Everybody, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Jesse, it's Helen. I just want to know when we're going, and he's going to be our guide.
Itai, actually, maybe we could ask the question of when is tourism opening back up in Israel? You know, it might not be when we're going as a group planned quite yet, but whenever that gets going, we'll start planning again. So do you have info on that, Itai?
So I can tell you that we as Israelis can start doing that at small groups and taking some measures. So I believe that the thing has to do with open. So if you are able to get to Israel, I'm sure that we can make this on foot and enjoy the real smells and feel of Jaffa. In terms of getting the airway, the air traffic open, for that I'm not sure, but I start to hear that there's a slight opening already coming in the following month. So hopefully in a few months, we would be able to do that on foot here and enjoying the real view of Jaffa.
And for everybody, I'm going to put in the chat box again the link to go and register for the other events that are going on, the other tours throughout April that will be going on, and let you all know that the tour or the event for this Sunday, April 11th, is an interactive cooking class that does have a limited number of attendees that can come. So make sure you go ahead and get registered for that if you're interested in the cooking program, and also make sure you get to the grocery store to do the cooking. And Itai, we've got a question here in the chat from Rich. where was the American colony in Jaffa?
So the American colony is outside walls of Jaffa. It is so again, just to give it in perspective, this is Old Jaffa, the area that I'm pointing here, and the American colony expanded and was in this area over here. So it was much further away from the old city, and we can try and have some more time, another time, and having a look at some of the buildings, because some of them are still there. And as you can see, some of the area here is still of one floor building that still maintain the old part of Jaffa. So this is the area. As you can see, the city was expanded quite dramatically at the second half of the 19th century. And when they started getting outside the walls, they were spreading out everywhere. So we showed before till where there were orchards, and you can see that the city expanded in this direction, but it also expanded up north, and therefore the American colony was built here.
Hi, everybody. Jesse had a slight computer issue, so I know we're past the hour. Itai, we had a question about some ships sinking off the coast. The ship Atlantean, was that in Jaffa or a different port?
I think you're talking about Altalena.
Altalena, thank you.
Altalena, yeah. So that was not in Jaffa. That was here in Tel Aviv, a bit to the north. So, and to show the exact location, we are talking about beach that is at this area here. So as you can see, that's already the new area of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv started expanding almost immediately when it was founded. So, but maybe I should say a few words about that, because that's Jaffa, that's Old Jaffa. And I was talking all the time about the fact that Jaffa was expanding. So there were new neighborhoods, mostly Muslim neighborhoods, that were growing around Jaffa. And this is the area that I'm currently pointing at. And the American colony that is here was part of that. Tel Aviv, which started here, actually started not as a neighborhood of Jaffa, but the people who founded Tel Aviv thought about that as a separate city, not a suburb of Jaffa, but a completely new city. And of course, in the beginning, it was much smaller than Jaffa. And as fate have it, Tel Aviv was growing in a huge pace. So it outnumbered Jaffa somewhere around the 1930s. And in 1948, when the state of Israel captured, actually just before the state of Israel was found, the Arab Jaffa was captured by Israeli forces. It was later added to Tel Aviv to be the complete city of Tel Aviv Jaffa that it is today. And today, Jaffa is a small neighborhood in Tel Aviv. And getting back to the question, the Altalena ship came into that port, and here at sea it was stopped. And this is the exact area. I can show you a bit at another time if you want. I can show you a bit of the signs of that and take you there. There's a monument there. And on that beach, there's also a sculpture of the Prime Minister at the time, David Ben-Gurion, who ordered the Altalena to stop. And that all happened here.
Thank you. Any other questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself? But for those of you signing off, thank you so much for joining us, and please sign up for our future virtual mission programs. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact the Federation. Thank you all.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
night.